Welcome to the APPI's Edmonton Events Committee's first luncheon of 2015. My name is Chris Wilcott, and I'm the chair of the Edmonton Events Committee. We're very excited about today's luncheon, as well as the luncheons that we have lined up for the rest of 2015. We are very pleased that you're all able to attend today's luncheon on a topic that is at the forefront of the planning profession, both here and around the continent. Today's presentation is on the very sensitive topic of infill development. I deal with it daily in my job, and it is a very sensitive topic. The challenges of infill development are multifaceted due to the complexities of existing policies, competing stakeholders, and public perceptions. However, infill is perhaps the best way that communities can reinvent themselves and become the vibrant and sustainable places that our profession aspires to create. Presenting today is Mr. Chris Dulaba, the owner of Callidus Development Management, as well as being a placemaker with Bel-Jan Development. Through Callidus, Chris has been involved in the planning, management, and development of a variety of projects throughout the capital region. As well as with Bel-Jan, Chris has been involved in a number of very exciting infill projects. Let's welcome Mr. Chris Dulaba, everyone.
Thanks again, Chris, for inviting me today to speak on a topic, obviously, that I'm quite passionate about, and I think a lot of folks in the room are passionate about, and as we know, it seems to be a growing trend throughout North America, and in particular in the Edmonton region as well. Again, my name is Chris Dulaba. I'm with Callidus Development Management, primarily focus on assisting with management advisory services on a range of developments. I'm also associated with Bel-Jan Development, where we are a boutique developer that focuses on infill development, either through the redevelopment of existing properties or adaptive reuse of existing buildings. So I'm going to speak a little bit about infill development, and two things came to mind. I mean, it's not that easy, but it's also not that hard. And when I speak about, when I say those, it comes more or less with some of the experience that I've had over the last number of years working on infill developments. And there's a certain approach and a certain tact you have to take with it. I mean, it's very different than your standard conventional type development. It may not be in the form of greenfield or anything that has a lot more of a sort of a linear or straightforward approach. So I'm going to speak a little bit on it's not that easy part, and there's three parts to that from a developer's standpoint that I find that it's why it's not that easy. And I think the first and foremost is risk, increased risk. And that actually is one of those, it's one of those aspects that can either be perceived or real. Another one is the fear of the unknown. Different processes, different community demographic backgrounds, different opportunities and constraints when you develop infill sites. In addition to that, unconventional processes. As we know, there isn't a straightforward or static process with most infill developments. So from a developer standpoint, I'm going to move this over here. From a developer standpoint, that's one of the reasons why it's not that easy. So speaking a little bit on increased risk, I think risk is one of the most important. There's two parts to this: perceived or real risks. The perceived risks, for the most part, from a developer standpoint, are one that you don't know what you're getting into, you don't know some of the community background, and that all types of infill development are way too risky. So at the end of the day, why go through it? Why, as a developer, should we expose ourselves to this type of risk at the end of the day? A perceived risk is also enough to scare developers, scare equity partners, in addition to from pursuing an opportunity. And as a developer, you have to weigh that increased risk. And oftentimes, does that greater risk come with a greater reward? Well, for the most part, in most infill developments, it may or may not. In fact, you probably have a greater and an easier opportunity to make a little bit more in terms of margins on doing a conventional or a greenfield development than you would on an infill development. So, as a developer, I mean, you often have to sort of say to yourself, well, is this something we want to do, knowing that the rewards at the end of the day may not add up versus if we were to do something more conventional. And that falls back from a developer standpoint on what's your philosophy as a developer, what do you want to do, and what type of project is reflective of your own culture and your own beliefs as a company. The fear of the unknown. By far, the greatest fear is what you don't know. And when you're walking into these types of infill developments, a lot of times you really don't know what you may or may not be getting into. You know, we know it's the standard stuff, potential neighborhood or landowner opposition is one major unknown. Will you get support from administration for what you're planning, and ultimately support from council if it does require council approval? Will there be, what kind of level of flexibility will there be as you go through the process with administration? Will they take more of a hardline approach on ensuring that policies are being maintained and followed, or will there be some type of flexibility? Long drawn out application processes is another unknown. You don't know sometimes when you're getting into something how long that process will be. And from a developer standpoint, obviously the old notion where time is money, and time is also risk. I mean, I think we can see it with even today, if a certain developer has paid a certain price for a property and had the aspirations on having a development in place and bringing in some cash flow, market realities can change very, very quickly. And I mean, with the change in oil prices over the last several months here, has happened very quickly. In the world of development, 7 months isn't that long. Albeit I'm not too concerned about where prices are going. That's a whole different topic altogether. You know, the fear of the unknown is something that can add costs that ultimately can kill a development. And it could also be enough to scare developers from wanting to redevelop a really well-positioned, great property. Another one is obviously the unconventional process. We all know that this can be a little bit more of a wild card, the process aspect of it. In greenfield or conventional developments, you more or less know what type of process you'll have to go through in order to get your entitlements and your approvals. With the infill development, you don't know. There are past precedent based on other similar projects you may look on, but because the variables are very different with each individual site and each individual community, you can't bank on that. You can't say, okay, well, because this happened over in the Oliver neighborhood and it went this long and it took 15 months and now they're building, will that happen if you're developing Garneau? Absolutely not. In fact, it might even have as much of an influence depending on which in particular neighborhood and part of the neighborhood you're developing, that could also sort of lead to a different process altogether. You more or less know what types of items will come up from the public and administration side when you're taking more of a conventional development versus an infill. It also allows you to better gauge the political outcome. With the infill development, sometimes you just don't know where that political outcome could be. Yes, as a whole, you might have the mayor and council touting more infill and more redevelopment, but when it gets down to sort of the nitty-gritty and the details, depending on what types of issues have arisen, that may have a sway on which way they would support your project. So it's something at the end of the day, from a process standpoint, can be very cumbersome, and one that from a developer you have to really sort of try to gauge, but you fully won't understand until you're actually in it. So you have to accept that as part of going back to the whole risk aspect. That's part of the risk.